I once worked as a direct care provider for a 65-year-old woman who was 40 years old. Her daughter worked all night. She needed a caregiver with medical experience. When I say I worked for them once, I mean I literally worked that night. You can hear why I never went back. The 65-year-old woman's name is Martha. Her daughter's name is Colleen. The person who contacted me was named Colleen. Maybe Colleen didn't have any other family to take care of her, and she didn't want to put Martha in a nursing home, or she couldn't afford to put Martha in a nursing home, or maybe she felt more comfortable hiring someone with experience at the time. I had already worked as a direct care provider for 2 women who had some kind of developmental disability, so I had experience, but nothing prepared me for that night. Colleen had gone to work earlier that day. I worked my first job, so I was really pushing my body to the point of exhaustion, trying to make as much money as possible. Colin. Martha introduced me to her. Martha gave me a smile before Colin brought her upstairs to her bedroom. It was about 9 p.m. Colin told me that Martha sometimes wandered around the house at night, confused, and I needed to calm her down and get her back to her room. When I asked, she specifically mentioned that it wasn't like sleepwalking. She said it was one of the symptoms of her mother's dementia. I told her to make sure I knew how to deal with it. I spent most of my time in the living room, watching my show in the room. These jobs aren't very interesting, and it's mostly sitting around a lot. I heard footsteps upstairs. I went to the stairs and looked up the stairs. Then I called out Martha's name and asked if she needed anything, and she said no. I heard her footsteps going back to her room, and then the door closed. Maybe she went to the bathroom. I went back to the living room and watched some more TV. Maybe an hour later I got up to get the sandwich I brought. When I left the kitchen to go back to the couch with a plate and my sandwich from the fridge, I almost had a heart attack, and the plate fell when I saw Martha standing in front of the glass door, all shattered. I apologized to her and asked if she was okay. She started yelling at me. "Who are you?" I reminded her who I am. I am her direct care worker here, to make sure she was okay. Right now she was screaming out loud, "Why are you here? I don't know you." I reminded her that we had just met and her mother Colleen had hired me to watch her and her room. It seemed like it had been working for so long that I had brought her back upstairs with me and brought her to her room. I brought her a glass of water and some melatonin and Casm. She took both before going back downstairs a few hours later. I was absolutely exhausted. I needed to get a few hours of shut-eye. There was an extra bedroom upstairs with a twin-size bed where Colin said I could rest if needed. I felt like Martha at the moment. I took the melatonin and fell asleep for the night. I fell asleep within minutes, but I only slept for a minute. About an hour later I was woken up by a sound, music, from downstairs. Every 1 to 2 seconds there was a swish sound. Something was swish sound from downstairs. I jumped out of bed. I left the bedroom door open so that I could hear Martha if she got up. Right here. When I got to the stairs, I realized that the swish sound was coming from the kitchen. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could. I looked back down quietly, around the open kitchen, and what I saw was like a scene from a horror movie. I had seen Martha standing in the dark before. The oven was opening and closing repeatedly. It was so scary when I said I saw Martha. I could really see her silhouette. It was so dark in the kitchen. I said to Martha very loudly, and she turned to my left and stopped. She closed the oven door one last time and started walking towards me. "Stairs," I said in a slightly softer, more scared voice now. "Are you okay?" She had come close enough to me where I could now see her features. She looked at me with this blank expression. Then she walked past me and started up the stairs. I followed her upstairs. But as soon as she reached her room, she closed her door. I knocked on the door. "Martha, are you okay?" She didn't respond. I quietly opened the door and peeked in, and I saw Martha standing next to her bed, just facing the wall. I saw but it was quite restless behavior that I think is right out of some scary movie, as I mentioned earlier. I went over to her and gently laid her down on the bed before I covered her and hopefully said goodnight to Martha one last time and closed the door. I went upstairs to the spare room and lay down on the bed again. I deliberately tried not to sleep for at least half an hour, so that she would wake up again, but I don't know if I managed to do that. For a long time I just knew I fell asleep very quickly. I woke up again, but much later the room was still dark and the 1-hour alarm I had set had not yet gone off. I looked around the room wondering if I had woken up. I didn't know what it was until I heard a sound from inside the closet. Then I noticed the open closet door had broken and the black shadow of a head was peeking out from the closet again. I almost had a heart attack. I said, "Martha, it's me." I didn't answer. I kept telling Martha, until I pushed the door open and I saw her slowly approaching the bed. She started saying what she had been saying hours before again. "I don't know you." As she approached, I tried to calm her down. I reminded her who I was. I grabbed the bedside lamp and pushed it through before it could light up. Martha was holding a huge kitchen knife in her hand. At that moment everything changed. Martha was now a threat to my life and I had to worry about myself. I screamed at that moment. Martha put the knife down. My screams became louder. She came closer and started screaming at me. I don't know you. I wasn't going to try to calm a knife-wielding dementia patient, which was not in any job description. I made a way to run around him in the bedroom and I went for it. I jumped out of bed away from him and he screamed again. As I ran past him, he threw the knife in the air. It was slow. From what I saw, it was a weak swipe but still showed that he actually intended to use it. Instead of going downstairs and grabbing my shoe and calling 911, I ran outside. I called Colin because he requested that I would if there was a problem. I was polite about doing it because getting law enforcement involved never helps anyone. Colin was yelling at me on the phone not to leave him and honestly I was yelling that he tried to kill me and I didn't call the police. He had to leave work. Of course I was outside the house making sure Martha didn't go anywhere until Colin got back. Colin walked in and Martha was asleep in her bed. Colin kept blaming me for exaggerating the whole thing, until he found the knife next to Martha's bed so he couldn't blame me for the incident anymore. I brushed off the fact that I never went to sleep but that didn't mean I felt wronged in any way. Colin even gave me that room to sleep in. I never worked in that house again. Martha was a more horrible patient than I had ever worked in 9 years. Helping as a direct caregiver. It was my first day working at this plumbing company. I was called to my first job at this house outside of town. The plumbing company had 5 employees and the owner would choose who would do what. I don't see it as a coincidence that I was sent to an undesirable job in a dirty area far away. For my first job, the call was for a leaky pipe under the sink, which is usually the easiest job to get a call for depending on the reason I pulled it. Until I had my first phone, and the room was absolutely disgusting, a house looking like a complete wreck, as if no one had lived there for years. I went up to the room and knocked on the door, until a middle-aged man opened the door. I didn't like his aura from the start. He had an unprepared, wide smile on his face that made his whole face look annoying. His voice was also really soft and high, not the voice I expected, or maybe it was because of his unusual appearance that he was welcoming me inside the house. I realized there wasn't a single piece of furniture in the room, just walked in. I asked him, he answered yes and then laughed, or maybe I should say he laughed because it was just a weird high-pitched smile. He took me to the kitchen and the first thing I did was put my stuff on the counter, then opened the cabinets under the sink. I slid myself under the sink and started checking the pipes, especially the P-trap and lock nuts, to make sure they weren't too tight or loose. I noticed the guy standing over me, his legs so spread that I was sandwiched between his legs, which was extremely uncomfortable. I politely asked him to give me some space and he backed up a little, but not enough to make me feel comfortable. I realized I couldn't see any water leaks, so I got out from under the sink and tried to run the water, but no water came out of the faucet. I looked at the strange guy and asked him why the water wasn't flowing. He said he must. I turned off the main water valve. When I said, I stood there speechless for a few seconds. I asked him pointedly if you were doing something wrong. He smiled and shrugged. I told him to turn the water valve back on. He turned and said he would be right back, and I saw him leave the kitchen, but then I heard footsteps walking upstairs. I have never in my life heard of a house with a water valve upstairs that I knew of. I was with this guy. And the situation, from the condition of this house to his behavior, everything. Then I heard multiple footsteps coming down the stairs from upstairs. In an instant I decided I was going to get out of there. I picked up my stuff and quickly walked out the front door and towards my van. I am a pretty big and strong guy, so I am not easily intimidated by people physically, but there was something about that situation, and that guy told me that someone was going to come down. I looked up at the house for a second and then I drove away. I called my boss Dave and told him it was just some kind of joke because it sounded better than me that I was scared of that guy. I investigated for a few minutes and found out that it was just an empty abandoned house. I got the number Dave called for the alleged leaky pipe, and it turned out to be a voice over IP number, not even a real number. I reported this shady encounter to the local police department so that they would be aware of it and maybe shut that house down. I never had a reason to go back to that shady part of town again. I only worked for that particular plumbing company for about a year. Music, back in 2019. I worked at Domino's. It was my first night when I was just starting out. I was working there because I needed money for college supplies for my dorm, etc. So that night when you were being trained, the manager would be with you on your first few deliveries to see how you were doing, and to evaluate you and train you. We got the order at 8 p.m. Our store wasn't electronic like it is today. We couldn't see the locations on a big TV. We had to go get directions on our phones. We got directions and pizza. I still remember ordering 4 large pizzas, 2 bottles of pipe, and we loaded them into the car. It was my car because I was the one being evaluated. So it was my manager and another trainee. I didn't know that the house we were going to was very strange. My town wasn't old at all, so it was pretty normal to drive for miles. It took us about 15 to 20 minutes to get there. The house looked old. It was an old 2-story house and it was completely falling apart. The wood was falling apart, some of the windows had boards on them. It wasn't the kind of house you would expect people to live in. I remember asking my manager if we had to go there and he said yes to both of us, but he would come with us and shake our hands. I hesitated with their pizza and soda. I got out of the car and noticed that the other new guy was also very nervous about walking up to the front door. We finally started to walk up there. The other intern said he thought someone was watching us through the farthest window on the top floor. Our manager told him he was scared and it wouldn't take more than a minute or two. We had to tell him to be quiet and be nice. I don't know how I got the courage to ring the bell, but I did. Of course it didn't work, so my manager knocked. No answer at the door. We waited about 15 seconds and knocked again, this time harder. Still no answer. We were all getting impatient and smelling something rotten. We couldn't tell if it was a house or if something had died inside. Finally, after about a minute of impatient waiting, someone opened the door, but not completely. They opened the door. Only part of their face was showing and asking who we were and what we wanted. My manager said we were the guy who quickly opened the door and made everything right. We were all three scared when he was treated so friendly. An older gentleman, at least 50 years old, told us that it took him a while to open the door because he has difficulty moving. Our manager gave him the receipt and asked if he was paying with cash or check. The guy told us he would be back with the money. He left the front door open. So I looked around. What it looked like inside: empty, completely empty, no furniture or anything, just the floor and a few blankets. This guy was obviously homeless and was staying here because no one else was. Just then we heard multiple footsteps upstairs. That's when we became uneasy about the situation. The other employee's words came true. As we walked towards the front door, someone must have been watching us. My manager yelled if the guy had any money, but he didn't get a response. The footsteps stopped, everything stopped, went silent. You could just tell. We heard the sound of all three of us breathing. My manager told us to stay at the front door and look around the room to see if the guy needed help or anything. We nodded to him and he walked back. We both heard footsteps, but not from upstairs. They were coming from below us. We were both completely confused, bewildered and frankly uneasy. Just then we heard our manager yelling and heard him running around frantically. He ran to the front of the house where we were both, and told us to get back in our cars, and we were leaving. I have never driven so fast in my life. My manager explained to us that as he was walking back, he saw a group of people in the dark surrounding a makeshift campfire of some kind, but the fire was very small. He approached them and noticed a baby deer in the middle. The group of men were sitting there laughing, as if they thought it was funny. The moment he said that, my heart almost stopped. I left for the new guy and I left right away. I heard the manager leave. I never did delivery work again after a month. Apparently we were attending a religious meeting and I am glad we left when we did.